This is a recording of a presentation from API Days Melbourne 2024 on product strategy for successful public APIs. My name's Elena Kelareva. I'm the product lead for the Apps API platform at Canva, which enables developers to build apps into Canva. In the past, I was also the product manager for the Google Maps web API, so I've included one example from that experience as well. Now, this presentation is specifically about public APIs. If we think about different levels of platforms, and this is referencing the keynote by Eric Wilder about different levels of platforms, and like different types of platforms. So Eric talked about platforms starting from infrastructure platforms like for example, your basic cloud infrastructure, through to developer platforms, through to business platforms. So this is like common business logic throughout your organization, like say payment systems or user authentication. And the highest level is public platforms, so that they may be partner APIs or fully public APIs. So this talk is specifically about that highest level of platforms where you're looking at building public APIs and what are the success factors for building public APIs. The first success factor is very similar to success factors across all platforms and products. Start with why. If you're considering building a public API platform, start with having a really clear understanding of why this is important for your organization. And this starts with understanding the why for your organization as a whole. So Canva's vision is to empower the entire world to design. We believe that the future of communication is visual, so we've built a complete visual work suite to empower people to design any kind of visual content, from social media posts to presentations, documents, whiteboards, websites, video, and print content. We've also brought together these design tools with a vast library of design templates and visual assets, so our users have everything they need to create a great design in one place. But along the way, we realized we can't do this alone. Just as our design template and asset library weren't built just entirely by Canva, but through partnerships and collaborations, we realized that with the vast range of use cases we were seeing and like niche feature requests as our user base grew, we can't possibly build every feature ourselves. So creating a public developer platform was the next step in our vision of empowering the world to design. A really full-featured developer platform takes a massive amount of work though. So we started with just a few key use cases. One use case was photo editing apps. This was an area where we could see users had a lot of very niche feature requests. If you're a marketer creating social media posts, you want to have access to a range of lots of different types of filters and effects for photo editing. So there's a demand for a very wide range of these kinds of effects. Now, third-party developers have great ideas for photo editing filters and effects. It doesn't make sense for Canva to build every possible filter and effect that we can think of, when third-party developers would be able to come up with a lot more variety and creative ideas. So we built a simple API just to enable apps to take a photo and transform it in some way. Our second key use case that we started with was coming from enterprise customers. So enterprise customers wanted integrations to streamline their workflows and improve their efficiency. Canva started off by empowering individuals and small teams to design, but over time, as the company grew, we moved towards empowering organizations. And we started hearing more requests from enterprise customers for integration with digital asset management platforms, in particular, importing content from these DAMs, such as Binder here in this example, being able to bring in their photography, their video content, their standard design assets into Canva, where it could be used by their creative teams. So our two main reasons for building a public developer platform were, one, to support niche use cases and features that were kind of common and standard, but we couldn't build every possible use case ourselves. And the second was to support enterprise customers. So these DAM integrations, it made sense to implement them through public APIs because they were integrations with a whole lot of other public platforms. So these two initial use cases both had really clear demand from our users and gave us a very clear why for building a public API platform. If you're considering building a public API platform for your product, think about what's the why for your organization. Is it similar to Canva? Do you have a whole bunch of niche use cases that you want to support where there's very similar use cases but that could be built by third-party developers? Or do you have some standard types of enterprise integrations that you want to enable? Or you might have some other why for your specific product. So we launched some basic MVP APIs just to support those key use cases in 2019. Those APIs basically just enabled apps that imported content into Canva or that transformed a photo. They weren't really very extensible to other use cases, but they helped us validate demand among developers and users. We quickly realized, though, that these really simple APIs were not going to be able to support the types of integrations that our users were asking for in the future. So we could see that there was demand for this from both developers and users, and we could see that there was going to be a need for a really full-featured developer platform. The key learning here is, if you're just starting out building your developer platform, try building some simple MVP APIs for key use cases first. This can help you validate demand before you commit to a full-featured developer platform at a lower cost compared to building the entire platform up front. Building these simple MVP APIs also helped us to understand the developer incentives because we could see how developers reacted to these first few APIs that we provided. So a public API platform only succeeds if third-party developers have incentive to build with your APIs. So consider what the incentives are for developers to engage with your platform. In the case of Canva, one of our biggest incentives was to connect with our rapidly growing community of users. With over 190 million monthly active users, Canva was a great opportunity for early-stage startups to reach customers, much easier than trying to build an audience from scratch. Now, the best way to understand why developers want to build apps on Canva is to hear from the app developers themselves. So here's a quote from Janvi Sriram, CEO of Crikey AI. The day after we launched our Canva app, we saw a 23x increase in growth to our product. Crikey AI is a small AI startup that uses AI to generate animated talking avatars. So it's quite popular among education in the education sector, where it's a very engaging way to create explainer videos, for example. As a small startup, it made sense for Crikey to build on a large existing platform to quickly reach a large number of users rather than trying to build up an audience completely from scratch. The second category of developers that we were trying to understand were enterprise customers. So for enterprise customers, their reason for building custom apps and integrations was to streamline workflows for their teams. 95% of Fortune 500 companies use Canva, and a lot of those companies wanted integrations and automations to save time for their teams. An example here is Ray White Real Estate. They switched to Canva to reduce IT costs and streamline their content creation workflows. They used Canva's Data Autofill API to build a custom integration to automate the creation of auction reports by automatically pulling auction data into pre-approved brand templates. This saved 16.5 hours a week of time for their agents, which is a huge time savings. If you think about it, real estate agents, the work they like doing best is actually talking to customers, selling real estate, not creating reports. So this saved them the busy work that was wasting their time and let them spend more of their time doing what they do best, actually talking to customers, selling property rather than creating marketing materials or reporting. A third type of developer that we were really wanting to engage with was platforms that had a large overlapping user base with Canva. So an example of this was Meta. They had advertisers creating designs for their posts and ads in Canva, but small businesses in particular struggle to meet quality guidelines and best practices. Since the small business owners often aren't professional marketers, the creative best practices evolve over time, they differ between different ad placements. It's quite hard to understand for somebody who's not a professional in this space. Meta did check ads for quality when they were uploaded, But this happened quite late in the process, and so it resulted in a lot of rework for advertisers. So what they did was they built the Meta Design Check app. This let advertisers get feedback on their ads within Canva right as they were designing. Earlier feedback meant that they had to do less rework, and that resulted in higher quality ads being created with less time spent. That's a win-win-win for Meta, Canva, and all of our shared users. So as we started to better understand how developers and users wanted to use integrations in Canva, we also realized that many of these use cases couldn't be met by our first set of MVP APIs. Those last three examples you saw, Meta, Ray White, Crikey AI, all of their apps and integrations couldn't be built with our first MVP APIs for photo editing and content upload. We realized we had to build a full-featured apps SDK to enable developers to build more advanced and complex apps. We launched this in June last year at our first Canva Extend developer event in San Francisco. This has resulted in our developer community and our app marketplace growing very rapidly. In slightly over a year, our developer community has created over 300 apps in our app marketplace. We've now had 221 million app installations across our user base. For comparison, it took the Salesforce App Exchange over 5 years to reach 1 million app installs, and another 2 years to double that. So we're very, very happy with these growth numbers. And these apps have become an indispensable part of our users' workflow. Apps have been now used 1 billion times since we launched the Canva Developers Platform a bit over a year ago. We see that many of our users are returning to their favorite apps over and over again, with some of them using apps on average 4 to 5 times a day. And the feedback from our users backs this up as well. Here's just a selection of quotes. So you can see that the platform overall has been really successful, and we're very happy with how it's progressed so far. But we're definitely not done yet. So we launched in 2023, and we knew this was only the start of our journey in building a public developer platform. When we launched our Apps SDK, we had APIs to add images, video, text, and audio to designs, but we didn't have APIs to read or edit content already on the design. In the past year, we built a vast array of features to enable apps to read, edit, and refine content. We also added some more advanced features like a color selector API, which lets users select colors within an app from the user's brand kit, the ability to run multiple apps at once, apps being able to go into a suspended state, and we've improved our developer tools along the way, introducing features such as app localization, analytics, app templates, and UI components to create a consistent look and feel across apps throughout Canva. But how did we make sure that we were building the right thing? Building the right things is often more difficult, but even more important than knowing that you're building it right. So we partnered closely with our developers from as far back as when we first started designing our public developer platform. We ran a beta program for about a year before we launched the Apps SDK. By working closely with developers such as Crikey AI, Ray White Real Estate, and Meta, this helped us to ensure that we were building the right APIs to support real-world use cases. So we knew that we were building something that developers would actually use. It let us get feedback on our API design to ensure that it would meet their needs and be easy for developers to use, and to avoid making breaking changes to fix things later. And finally, it enabled us to launch our Apps SDK, and more recently our REST Connect APIs, with several apps and integrations launched simultaneously to provide examples of best practices to developers, and to showcase the kinds of things you could build with these new APIs, to inspire other developers to build their own apps and integrations. So if you're considering building a public API platform, think about how you'd partner with your developers to make sure that your APIs are designed for key use cases from the start. Get feedback on your API design to avoid breaking changes, and have a few examples of apps and integrations at launch. Now, one final thing to consider when you're building a public API platform is consider your deprecation policy upfront. This is much, much more important for public APIs versus internal APIs. So even if you've got an experienced platform team that's got a lot of experience building internal APIs, this is something that can catch out even experienced teams the first time that they build a public API. Public APIs are really hard to change. Once you build a public API and third-party developers start building things with it, breaking changes and deprecating API features becomes much, much more difficult than changing an internal API. Now, the Canva Apps SDK was only launched about a year ago, so we haven't had a lot of deprecations to deal with yet. So for this one, I wanted to tell a story that I actually spoke about at the first ever Melbourne API Days, back when I was working on the Google Maps APIs. So on the Google Maps team, we had a version 2 of the Google Maps JavaScript API, which was deprecated. We'd launched version 3. We announced the 3-year deprecation timeline. As that 3-year timeline approached, we realized there were still a lot of people using it. So we announced a 6-month extension to the turndown date. We started sending increasingly urgent emails to all the customers. We even had our customer support team actually calling customers by phone, telling them that your maps are about to break, you really need to migrate to V3 urgently. And what we heard was some customers said they would not be ready to migrate, and they were using it for mission-critical applications. Like, there would be really serious consequences if it was turned off. If you think about it, like, I can't talk about specific customers and what exactly they were using it for, but Google Maps gets used for like pretty much any business that delivers any kind of product or service to physical locations uses Google Maps somewhere in its admin system, including mission-critical or even life-saving products and services. So in the end, as we started to realize just how many customers were still out there, some of which we hadn't been able to contact, we ended up realizing we actually can't turn this off. So instead of turning it off completely, we built a shim to convert V2 requests to V3 requests so that V2 requests would not break when we removed the V2 backends. So 3.5 years, and we still had to maintain these V2 APIs. If you are thinking about building a public developer platform, think about that story and consider what use cases there are in your product or service that might be really challenging in terms of deprecations. Now at Canva, we're still early in our public APIs journey, and our deprecations process hopefully won't be quite as challenging because nobody will die if their favorite photo editing app breaks in Canva. Even so, we have been considering our strategy for breaking changes and deprecations right from the start to make sure we're setting our platform up for success. Well, how have we done that? To start with, the best deprecation is the one you don't have to make. So planning for deprecation starts with designing APIs for extensibility and partnering with your developers to ensure you're building the right thing. Things like beta programs, early feedback, all of these avoid having to make deprecations in future. We've also developed migration pathways for our earlier basic, like single use case APIs. And when we launched a V2 of our Apps SDK at our 2024 Canva Extend developer event just a few weeks ago, this included a lot of new features, but it also had some breaking changes. So we've allowed developers with apps already in progress to continue launching their apps until the end of this year. And we've given developers of existing apps a year to migrate. We've also provided migration guides to really help them along the way. So in summary, if you're considering building a public API platform in your organization, get really clear on your why, like why is a public API platform important and necessary for your organization rather than just internal APIs. Build some MVPs for key use cases first to validate the demand for your platform, both among developers and among users who will be using these apps and integrations. Understand your developer incentives and categories of developers who might want to build on your platform. And the incentives may differ between those different developer archetypes. Design your APIs for extensibility so that you don't end up having to deprecate things later. Partner with your developers to ensure that you're building the right thing and get early feedback on your API design and usability of those APIs. And consider deprecations upfront to save yourselves and your developers a lot of work in managing breaking changes. Thank you.